The signal was weak. It flickered like a dying candle in a storm, barely visible against the endless noise of space. But it was there. It was real. And it was coming from a place where nothing should exist. The Kalari listening station floated in the cold darkness of Sector 77 Gamma, its massive sensors always searching, always listening. For 300 years, the Kalari had watched the stars. They had seen empires rise and fall. They had witnessed species take their first steps into the void, and they had recorded the silence when those species disappeared forever. The Kalari were patient. The Kalari were ancient. And the Kalari knew one simple truth that younger species always learned too late. Space did not care about hope. Officer Thena was the first to notice the signal. She had been monitoring the hollow rift, a twisted region of space where gravity itself seemed to go mad. Ships that entered the rift did not return. The gravitational forces inside would tear metal apart like paper. Radiation storms swept through without warning. Micro-singularities, tiny black holes no bigger than a grain of sand, wandered through the darkness and swallowed anything they touched. The hollow rift was not a place. It was a grave. So when Thena saw the signal coming from inside the rift, she thought her equipment was broken. She checked it 3 times. She called her supervisor. Together they listened to the impossible broadcast. The voice was human. Of course it was human. Only humans still used such primitive electromagnetic signals. The message was simple, almost childish in its directness. It repeated every 30 seconds, never changing, never stopping. This is the colony ship Dandelion Seed. We have 2,147 souls aboard. We are trapped in the hollow rift. Our engines are destroyed. We are not dying. Repeat, we are not dying. We will wait for rescue. Dandelion Seed out. Thena felt something she rarely felt anymore. She felt sad. The humans did not understand. They could not understand. They were so young as a species, barely 1,000 years into their journey among the stars. They still believed that courage was enough. They still believed that wanting to live meant you would live. The signal had been broadcasting for 11 months. Fleet Admiral Vorath received the report within the hour. He was old even by Kalari standards, his silver skin marked with the dark lines that showed his centuries of service. He had led rescue missions before. He had saved thousands of lives across dozens of worlds, but he had also recovered bodies. Many bodies. And he knew, with the certainty that only age could bring, that this mission would end the same way. Still, he assembled the armada, 12 ships, the finest the Kalari had. They would enter the hollow rift. They would find the human vessel, and they would bring back whatever remained. Before they departed, Vorath called for observer Thessa. She was a documentarian, trained to record history as it happened. Her job was to watch, to remember, and to add her recordings to the great galactic archive that held the memory of every species that had ever lived. "You will come with us," Vorath told her. "You will document what we find." Thessa understood what he was truly saying. She would document humanity's failure. She would record another example of a young species reaching too far, flying too high, and falling into the darkness. It would be added to the archive alongside hundreds of similar stories, a warning for future generations, a lesson written in death. "The humans believe they are still alive," Thessa said quietly. "Their message says they are not dying." Vorath's expression did not change. "Their message has been repeating for 11 months. Humans cannot survive more than 30 days without resupply, 40 at most if they ration carefully. Their bodies are fragile. They need constant food, constant water, constant warmth. The hollow rift provides none of these things." "Then why do they keep broadcasting?" The Admiral looked out at the stars. Somewhere in that vast darkness, a human voice was still calling for help. still believing that someone would come, still refusing to accept what the universe had already decided. Because they are human, Vorath said. They do not know how to stop hoping, even when hope is foolish, even when hope is cruel. They cling to it until the very end. He paused. It is perhaps their greatest weakness. The Armada launched 3 days later. Thessa stood on the observation deck of the flagship, watching the stars blur as they entered faster-than-light travel. She thought about the humans on that ship. She tried to imagine what their final days must have been like, the food running out, the water recyclers failing, the cold creeping in as power systems died one by one, children crying for their parents, parents unable to give them anything but lies. We will be rescued. Help is coming. Everything will be fine. Lies that no one believed. Lies spoken anyway, because silence was worse. Thessa began composing her documentary in her mind. She would call it The Last Broadcast of the Dandelion Seed. It would be respectful. It would honor the humans who died believing they could survive the impossible. It would acknowledge their courage, even as it demonstrated their foolishness. The galaxy would watch it and feel a moment of sadness for the lost humans. Then they would move on. They would forget. And humanity would remain what it had always been in the eyes of the older species. A young race, bright but brief, burning hot and dying fast. The Kalari had a word for species like humans. They called them mayflies. Beautiful for a moment, gone by morning. Thessa did not know that everything she believed was about to change. She did not know that the humans on the dandelion seed had not given up. She did not know that for 11 months, while the galaxy assumed they were dead, those humans had been fighting a war against the universe itself, and winning. The Armada flew on toward the hollow rift, carrying with them the certainty of death. They were wrong, but they would not discover how wrong until they opened that airlock and saw what humanity had built from nothing but stubborn, irrational, magnificent refusal to die. The signal kept broadcasting. The voice of Lieutenant Bayek Minho echoed through the void, patient and calm. We are not dying. We will wait for rescue. For 11 months, he had been telling the truth. The hollow rift was worse than the reports had described. Admiral Vorath had read every file, studied every scan, prepared for every danger. None of it mattered. The reality of the rift was something that had to be felt to be understood. The first scout ship was torn apart within minutes of entry. One moment it was there, flying alongside the Armada. The next moment it was twisted metal, scattered across the void like leaves in a hurricane. The gravitational forces came from nowhere and everywhere at once. They pulled in directions that should not exist. The ship's navigator screamed that his instruments were showing 6 different versions of reality at the same time. Vorath lost a second ship an hour later. This one was swallowed by a micro-singularity, there and gone so fast that no one even had time to send a final message. 12 ships became 10. The Admiral considered turning back. He had already lost good people. The humans they were searching for were certainly dead. What was the point of adding more bodies to the grave? But the signal was still broadcasting, that impossible, stubborn signal. It pulled them forward like a rope in the darkness. It took 3 days to navigate through the rift. 3 days of constant fear, constant adjustment, constant prayer to whatever gods the Kalari still believed in. When they finally detected the human ship, everyone on the bridge fell silent. The dandelion seed was not what they expected. It was damaged, yes. The rear section where the engines should have been was gone, torn away by whatever disaster had first trapped them here. Scorch marks covered the hull. Holes had been patched with materials that did not match, creating a patchwork pattern across the ship's skin. But there were lights. Windows glowed with soft warmth. Power indicators showed systems running. And most impossible of all, the thermal scans showed heat signatures, many heat signatures, moving heat signatures. "That cannot be correct," Vorath said. His voice was barely a whisper. "I have checked 3 times, Admiral," the sensor officer replied. "There are approximately 2,000 life forms on that vessel. They are alive." No one spoke. No one could speak. For 11 months, they had assumed the humans were dead. The mathematics had been clear. The biology had been certain. Humans could not survive this long without food, without proper medical care, without protection from radiation. It was simply impossible. The humans had done it anyway. Captain Dren led the boarding team. He was young for a Kalari, only 80 years old. But he had seen enough death in his career to know its smell, its weight, its presence in a room. As his shuttle approached the dandelion seed, he prepared himself to find horror. Maybe a few survivors, driven mad by isolation. Maybe automated systems keeping bodies warm. Maybe some trick of the sensors that had given them false hope. The airlock opened. Air rushed out, warm and clean and breathable. Standing in the doorway was a human male. He was thin. His uniform was patched in a dozen places. His face showed lines of exhaustion that would take years to heal, but his back was straight. His eyes were clear, and when he spoke, his voice was steady. "Welcome aboard the Dandelion Seed. I am Captain Park Teho. We have been waiting for you." Behind him, Dren saw something that would stay with him for the rest of his very long life. Children. Human children were playing in the corridor, laughing and chasing each other. A woman in a medical coat walked past, nodding politely to the aliens. An old man sat in a chair, reading from a tablet, as calm as if he were sitting in his living room on Earth. This was not a tomb. This was not a ship of desperate survivors clinging to their final hours. This was a community, a living, functioning community that had somehow built a life in the middle of hell. Dren's hands were shaking as he activated his communicator. "Admiral Vorath, they are alive. All of them. They are all alive." The silence that followed lasted nearly a minute. "How?" Vorath finally asked. "That is not possible." "I am looking at them, Admiral. I am standing in their ship. Children are playing behind their captain. I do not understand how, but they have survived." Observer Thessa was on the second shuttle. When she stepped onto the dandelion seed, her documentary equipment recorded everything. The patched walls, the recycled air that smelled faintly of growing plants, the hand-painted signs that pointed to different sections of the ship, the small garden visible through a window, green and alive in a room that should have held cargo. A little girl approached her. The child could not have been more than 6 years old. She looked up at Thessa with curious eyes and held out a drawing. "I made this," the girl said. "It is our home in the stars. Do you like it?" Thessa looked at the drawing. It showed the dandelion seed floating in space, surrounded by colorful stars. Stick figures stood in the windows, waving. At the bottom, the child had written words in careful, uneven letters. "We never gave up." For the first time in her career, Thessa did not know what to say. Her entire life had been spent documenting the failures of young species. She had recorded tragedies, extinctions, last moments. She had never recorded anything like this. Captain Taiho stood nearby, watching the alien reactions with tired patience. He had known this moment would come. For 11 months, he had told his people that rescue would arrive. He had promised them that their signal would be heard. Some had doubted. Some had despaired. But they had kept working anyway, kept living anyway, kept fighting anyway. Now the rescuers were here, and they were looking at the humans like they were seeing something impossible, something that should not exist. Teho understood. He had felt the same way many times during those 11 months. Every time a crisis came and they somehow survived it. Every time a system failed and they found a way to fix it. Every time the universe tried to kill them and they refused to die. "You seem surprised," he said to Dren. The Kalari captain struggled for words. "We thought you would be dead. Everyone thought you would be dead. How did you survive?" Taiho looked back at his ship, at the children playing, at the doctors working, at the engineers who had rebuilt their world from scraps and hope. "We survived because we had no other choice," he said simply. "We survived because our children needed tomorrow. We survived because somewhere out there, someone was listening to our signal, and we would not let them arrive to find us gone." He smiled then, a small and weary smile. "Humans are not good at giving up. It is perhaps our greatest strength." Thessa recorded every word. Her hands were trembling. Everything she thought she knew about humanity, about survival, about what was possible and impossible, was crumbling around her. The mayflies had refused to die, and now she would have to tell the galaxy why. Captain Taiho led the Kalari through the ship. He walked slowly, not because he was weak, but because there was so much to show them. 11 months of survival had transformed the dandelion seed from a simple colony vessel into something else entirely, something that should not exist. "We knew help might not come," Taiho explained as they walked. "We hoped, but we could not count on hope alone, so we built." The first stop was Cargo Bay 3. Before the disaster, it had held equipment for the colony they would never reach. Now it was a garden. The Kalari stood in the doorway and stared at rows of green plants growing under lights that had been pulled from the walls of other sections. Water flowed through tubes made from melted plastic containers. The air was thick and humid and smelled of life. Engineer Cho Hana stood among her plants like a proud mother. She was a small woman with gray streaks in her hair that had not been there 11 months ago. Her hands were rough and scarred from endless work. "Food was our first problem," she said. "We had supplies for maybe 40 days. After that, nothing. So we grew our own." She showed them the algae tanks, green and bubbling, producing oxygen and protein at the same time. She showed them the vegetable beds, where tiny carrots and radishes pushed up through recycled soil. She showed them the rice paddy, no bigger than a closet, where a precious crop was slowly maturing. "Where did you get the seeds?" Dren asked. Hana smiled. "The colony supplies included agricultural packages. We were supposed to plant them on our new world. Instead, we planted them here." She touched a tomato plant gently. "We eat less than we would like, but we eat, and that is enough." The next stop was the medical bay. Dr. Kim Yuna was waiting for them, her white coat stained with work that never ended. Behind her, beds held patients recovering from various injuries and illnesses. The equipment was a strange mix of original ship supplies and improvised tools that Yuna had built herself. "Radiation was our second problem," she said. "The rift is full of it. Our shields were damaged in the initial disaster. Every day our people were being poisoned." She showed them the treatment she had developed. It was crude by Kalari standards, a combination of medicines and procedures that any proper hospital would consider primitive. But it worked. Somehow, against all odds, it worked. "I performed 847 procedures in 11 months, Yuna said quietly. "Surgeries, treatments, emergency interventions. I lost 12 patients." Her voice cracked slightly. "I could not save everyone, but I saved most of them. I saved most of them." Thessa watched the doctor's face. She saw exhaustion there and grief and something else that she was beginning to recognize. Pride. Not arrogant pride, but the quiet pride of someone who had done the impossible because impossible was not an acceptable outcome. "How did you perform surgery without proper equipment?" Thessa asked. Yuna led them to a small room. On a table sat a collection of tools that made the Kalari medical officer gasp. Scalpels made from sharpened metal scraps, clamps fashioned from wire and plastic, a flashlight mounted on a stand to serve as an operating light. Our main surgical suite was destroyed in the first week, Yuna explained. A radiation spike contaminated everything. So I built new tools. I learned to work in conditions I never imagined. One night, I delivered a baby by flashlight while the ship shook around us. The mother lived, the baby lived. She paused. That was a good night. The tour continued. Security Chief Yoon Siwon showed them the EVA suits, patched and repaired so many times that they were more tape than fabric. He explained the 23 missions his teams had conducted outside the ship, manually attaching thrusters to keep them from drifting into a micro-singularity. 14 of those missions were during radiation storms, he said. My people knew what they were doing. They knew the radiation would hurt them. They went anyway. Why? Admiral Vorath asked. He had joined the tour now, unable to stay on his ship while this impossible story unfolded. Siwon looked at him with calm eyes. Because if they did not go, everyone would die. The ship would fall into the singularity. 2,300 people would be crushed into nothing. My volunteers chose shortened lives over allowing that to happen. He straightened his shoulders. That is what humans do. We choose. Even when both choices are terrible, we choose. And then we live with our choice. The final stop was the school. It was a small room carved out of what had once been a storage area. Children sat at desks made from packing crates, learning mathematics from a teacher who wrote equations on a wall with chalk made from ground-up rock. Thessa stood in the doorway and felt something break inside her. You had a school, she whispered. You were trapped in hell, dying slowly, running out of everything, and you built a school. Taiho stood beside her. The children needed to learn. The crisis would end someday one way or another. If we survived, they would need education to build their futures. If we died, we wanted them to die knowing that their parents had never stopped believing in tomorrow. That is irrational, Thessa said. That is completely irrational. Yes, Taiho agreed. It is. Humans are irrational. We hope when there is no reason to hope. We build schools during disasters. We plant gardens in tombs. We refuse to accept what the universe tells us is true. He looked at the children, who were now watching the strange aliens with curiosity rather than fear. Maybe that is foolish, but it is also why we are still here. Thessa raised her recording device and spoke directly into it, her voice shaking. Previous records describe humanity as fragile. Previous records describe them as impulsive and short-lived. I am officially submitting a correction to the Galactic Archive. She paused, gathering herself. Humans are not fragile. They are merely soft on the outside. Inside, they are made of something that I do not have a word for. Something that refuses to break. Something that builds schools in the darkness and gardens in the void. She lowered the device and looked at Captain Taiho. I came here to document your extinction, she said. Instead, I have documented something else entirely. I do not know what to call it. Taiho smiled his tired smile. We call it hope, he said. Stubborn, foolish, irrational hope. It is the most human thing we have. Outside the windows, the hollow rift raged on, uncaring and deadly. But inside the dandelion seed, children laughed and plants grew and doctors healed and humans lived, against all odds, against all reason, against the universe itself. They lived. The evacuation would take time. The Kalari ships needed to be prepared, the humans needed to be transported safely, and the journey back through the rift would be dangerous for everyone. While the crews worked on logistics, observer Thessa conducted interviews. She needed to understand. The galaxy needed to understand. She started with Captain Taiho. They sat in his quarters, a small room that showed signs of 11 months of wear. The walls had marks where decorations had been hung and removed. A photograph of a woman sat on a shelf, faded and worn from being held too many times. "My wife," Tejo said when he saw Thessa looking. "She died in the initial disaster. She was in the engine room when it was torn away." "I am sorry." Tejo nodded slowly. "Many people lost family that day. 93 people died in the first hour. We did not have time to mourn properly. We were too busy trying to survive." "How did you keep everyone together?" Thessa asked. "How did you prevent panic and despair?" Tejo was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was heavy with memory. "We almost lost hope in month 4. The second crop had failed. Contaminated soil we discovered too late. We had maybe 2 weeks of food left. People were scared. Some wanted to give up, to stop fighting, to just let the end come. I understood. I felt the same way." "What changed?" "The children." Tejo smiled, but his eyes were wet. "One morning, a little boy came to me. He could not have been more than 5 years old. He asked me what we were having for breakfast tomorrow. Not today, tomorrow. He was already thinking about the next day, the next meal, the next morning. He did not know we were running out of food. He just knew that tomorrow existed, and he wanted to know what was coming." Tejo wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "I could not tell him there would be no breakfast. I could not tell any of the children that we had failed them. So I went to Engineer Hana, and I said we needed to find a way. Any way. And she did. She found contamination-resistant strains in our seed stock. She rebuilt the soil from scratch. She worked for 72 hours without sleep, and there was breakfast the next morning. All of that because of one child's question? All of that because we could not bear to disappoint them. The children never knew how close we came to the end. They never knew how many times we nearly lost. They just kept living, kept learning, kept believing that their parents would take care of everything. And we could not let them be wrong." Thessa's next interview was with Dr. Kim Yuna. The doctor looked older than her years, worn down by the weight of responsibility that had rested on her shoulders. "Tell me about the worst night," Thessa said. Yuna's hands trembled slightly. "Month 7. A pregnant woman went into labor during a radiation storm. Our medical bay was contaminated from a previous incident. I had to perform the delivery in a storage closet, with flashlights held by volunteers, using tools I had made myself." "What happened?" "Everything went wrong. The baby was positioned badly. The mother was losing blood. The ship was shaking so hard I could barely stand. I had no proper medication, no proper equipment, no proper anything." Yuna paused, struggling with the memory. "I prayed. I am not religious, but I prayed. I asked the universe to let them live. I promised I would never ask for anything else. And they lived. Both of them. I do not know how. The baby came out crying, and the mother was laughing and crying at the same time. And I just stood there covered in blood and tears, and I could not believe what had happened." Yuna looked at Thessa directly. "That was when I understood something important. The universe does not care about us. It does not want us to live or die. It simply is. But we care. We want to live. And sometimes, if we want it badly enough, if we fight hard enough, we can win against something that does not even know it is fighting us." The final interview was the hardest. Security Chief Yoon Siwon took Thessa to a cargo bay that had been converted into something else. 16 markers stood in rows, each one carved from metal and decorated with small offerings, flowers made from colored paper, drawings from children, small tokens and trinkets that meant nothing to strangers but everything to those who left them. 12 died from injuries in the initial disaster, Siwon said. 4 died on EVA missions, radiation exposure. They knew the risks. They went anyway. Thessa walked among the graves. She read the names carved into each marker. Human names, young names, old names. Each one a person who had lived and fought and finally lost. Do people visit often? Every day. Different people at different times. The children come to leave drawings. The adults come to talk. Siwan's voice was rough. We could not bury them properly. We could not send them home, but we could give them this place. We could remember them. A little girl entered the cargo bay, clutching a piece of paper. She walked to one of the markers and carefully placed her drawing at its base. Then she sat down and began talking softly to the metal marker as if it were a person. Her father, Siwan explained quietly. He was on EVA Mission 16. He knew the radiation would kill him eventually. He went because if he did not, the ship would have drifted into a singularity. He saved everyone. He just could not save himself. Thessa watched the girl talking to her father's grave. She watched other humans enter and pay their respects. She watched a community united by loss and survival, by grief and gratitude. I do not understand you, she said finally. Your biology is weak. Your lifespans are short. You lack the technology of older species. By every measure, you should have died here, all of you. You should have given up months ago. Why did you not? Siwan considered the question carefully. Because giving up meant our children would never see the sun again. Because giving up meant the people who died in the first hour would have died for nothing. Because giving up meant admitting that the universe was right about us. He looked at the graves of his fallen friends. We humans have a saying. It goes, we rage against the dying of the light. It means we do not go quietly. Even when the darkness is winning, even when there is no hope, we keep fighting. We keep burning, until the very last moment. Thessa saved her recording and stood in silence for a long time. She had come to document the death of mayflies. Instead, she had witnessed something else entirely. She had seen a species that did not know how to surrender, a species that built hope from nothing and refused to let go of it even when the universe itself tried to tear it away. The Kalari lived for thousands of years. They had seen entire civilizations rise and fall. They considered themselves wise and patient and understanding. But watching that little girl talk to her father's grave, watching a community mourn and survive at the same time, Thessa realized that the Kalari had missed something important. Wisdom was not about knowing when to give up. Wisdom was about knowing that some things were worth fighting for even when you could not win. The humans understood this. They had always understood this. And now the galaxy would learn it too. The evacuation took 3 days, one by one. The humans of the dandelion seed were transferred to Kalari vessels. They carried almost nothing with them. Everything they had owned was gone or worn out or given away. But they walked with their heads high, holding their children's hands, supporting their elderly, caring for their sick. They looked like refugees, but they moved like conquerors. Captain Taiho was the last to leave. He stood at the airlock for a long time, looking back at the ship that had been their prison and their salvation for 11 months. The walls were scarred, the lights were dim, the air recyclers wheezed and rattled. But somewhere in those corridors, rice was still growing in a tiny paddy. Somewhere, a garden was still producing vegetables. Somewhere, children's drawings still decorated the walls. "Thank you," Taiho whispered to the empty ship. Then he bowed deeply, a gesture of respect that the Kalari did not fully understand, but somehow found beautiful. He stepped through the airlock without looking back. The door closed behind him, and the dandelion seed was left alone in the hollow rift. A monument to stubbornness, a temple to survival. Admiral Vorath made a decision during the journey home. It was unusual. Some would call it improper. But he had seen what the humans had built, and he believed the galaxy needed to see it too. He ordered observer Thessa to broadcast her full documentation on the galactic network. Not just a summary, not just a report. Everything, every interview, every image, every moment of the impossible story that had unfolded inside the rift. The broadcast began as the Armada emerged from the hollow rift. Within hours, it had reached every corner of known space. The galaxy watched. They watched engineer Chohana show her gardens, explaining how she had grown food from nothing. They watched Dr. Kim Yuna describe her surgeries, her voice breaking as she spoke of the lives she saved and the lives she lost. They watched Security Chief Yoon Siwon explain how his volunteers walked into radiation storms because 2,000 people needed them to be brave. They watched children learning mathematics in a makeshift school while the universe tried to kill them. They watched a little girl place a drawing at her father's grave. They watched Captain Park Tae-ho answer the question that everyone was asking: how did you survive when survival was impossible? We survived because we had no other choice, he said on the recording. We survived because our children needed tomorrow. We survived because somewhere out there someone was listening to our signal, and we would not let them arrive to find us gone. The reactions came quickly. The Velen Confederacy had always considered humans to be too chaotic, too emotional, too short-lived to be taken seriously as partners. They watched the broadcast in their crystal halls and saw something different. They saw a species that could turn chaos into order, emotion into strength, short lives into meaningful action. Within a week, the Velen sent a formal request for alliance negotiations. We were wrong about humanity, their message said. We would like the chance to be right. The Thren Collective was known for logic and reason. They had calculated humanity's survival probability at 0.003%. They watched the broadcast and recalculated. The mathematics remained the same. The humans should have died. But they had not died, and the Thren were forced to consider variables they had never included in their equations before: will, determination, love. These things could not be measured, but they clearly mattered. The Thren submitted a formal request to the Galactic Council. Humans should be reclassified from emerging species to endurance apex. It was unprecedented. The Council approved it unanimously. The Oryx worlds were warriors. They respected strength and courage above all else. They watched the broadcast and saw both. They saw volunteers walking into radiation that would kill them. They saw a doctor fighting death with tools made from scraps. They saw a captain who carried the weight of 2,000 lives and refused to let it crush him. The Oryx High Command issued a declaration: any attack on human territories would be considered an act of war against the Oryx. They have proven they cannot be broken, the declaration read. Only fools fight the unbreakable. 6 months later, the survivors of the Dandelion Seed stood on a new world. The Kalari had given it to them, not sold, not traded, given. A world with blue skies and green land and water that fell from the clouds like a gift. A world where children could play outside without fear. A world where tomorrow was not something to be fought for, but something to be welcomed. The dedication ceremony was held on a warm morning. Representatives from dozens of species had come to witness it. The Velen were there. The Thren were there. The Oryx were there. Even species that had never shown interest in humans before had sent observers. Captain Tae-ho stood before the crowd. He looked different now, healthier, rested. But his eyes still carried the weight of everything he had seen and done. A Kalari diplomat approached him before the ceremony began. She was young by their standards, eager and curious. I have studied your broadcast many times, she said. I have one question I cannot answer. Your people were trapped for 11 months with no hope of rescue. How did you not surrender? How did you not simply give up? Tae-ho looked out at the crowd. He saw Dr. Yuna holding a baby that had been born on the new world, the first of a new generation. He saw Engineer Hana, already sketching plans for farms and gardens and all the growing things she would create. He saw Lieutenant Minho, who had sent the signal that saved them all, teaching Kalari children a human game called tag. He saw Security Chief Siwan standing alone, looking at the sky, perhaps thinking of the 16 who had not made it. He saw the children of the dandelion seed running across green grass, laughing and shouting and being alive in ways they had not been able to be for 11 long months. "We did not surrender," Taiho said slowly, "because the universe was watching, and we wanted it to know something important about us, something true." "What did you want the universe to know?" Taiho smiled. It was not a weary smile anymore. It was a real smile, full of warmth and peace and hard-won joy. "Humans do not go quietly," he said. "We rage against the darkness. We build gardens in tombs and schools in disasters and hope from nothing at all. We are small and soft and brief. We live for moments compared to the stars. But in those moments, we burn brighter than anything in the galaxy. We love harder. We fight longer. We refuse more stubbornly." He looked up at the blue sky of his new world. "The universe told us we were going to die. We told the universe it was wrong. And here we are, alive, together, home." The ceremony began. Speeches were given, songs were sung, children planted trees that would grow for generations, and across the galaxy, on 1,000 different worlds, the broadcast continued to play. Species that had never thought twice about humanity watched it and reconsidered. They saw the gardens. They saw the school. They saw the graves and the love and the stubborn, foolish, magnificent refusal to surrender. They saw what humanity truly was, not mayflies, not fragile creatures who burned bright and died fast. Something else, something more, something that even the universe itself could not break. The signal from the dandelion seed had long since stopped broadcasting, but its message continued to echo through the stars. "We are not dying. We will wait for rescue." Humanity had waited. Humanity had survived, and the galaxy would never see them the same way again.